Welcome back. All right, I want to talk about some interesting storylines right now involving the 2022-2023 NHL season. And I come up with these 11 topics. I throw them on the board. I'm not writing them on as we talk here, so let's go ahead and go through it. First off, I want to start with the Offside Challenge. The Offside Challenge continues to be a topic of discussion. I mentioned during last night's recap video that, of course, you'll hear people saying, well, they need to do away with the Offside Challenge. The Offside Challenge is a problem. The NHL very unlikely to remove the offside challenge. And again, I mentioned this last night. I'll mention it again here. We do not want to end up in a nightmare scenario where a goal scored in, say, Game 7 of the Stanley Cup Final is offside and they don't have review. They're not able to challenge it. And there's always been the discussion of how many challenges should a coach have. My answer to that's kind of as many as needed to make sure that everything is called correctly. And there are times during a game where as soon as they make zone entry, I say, yeah, they're offside. That play's offside. And there's times where it's really obvious, where I'm like, wow, there's no way that play was onside. And again, as soon as you see that in game, your reaction is, I hope nobody scores here. Or if you like chaos, your reaction is, I really hope somebody scores here so that goal won't count. But yeah, the offside challenge continues to be a discussion point. I don't think the NHL ever changes it. And then you have goalie interference. Goalie interference continues to be a discussion. I will say it's not as much of a discussion now as it was, I'll say 3-4 years ago. I don't think there's as many calls that are hard to call. Like basically if a goaltender's able to get set and make the save, then goalie interference, very unlikely to be called. In the event that a goaltender's interfered with, can't make the save, or it's maybe he could, maybe he couldn't, you'll usually give the benefit of the doubt to the goaltender. But goalie interference is always going to be a call that is tough. And when I do reviews and when I do videos with news stuff and everything, I always consider a person who's protesting, that goal should have counted, and you'll look at their username and it's, VJK101 or whatever it is. And you'll go, okay, so you say that goal should have counted. It was a Vegas goal, and that's in your username, so okie dokie. And there's definitely some of that, too, the tribalism when it comes to sports. I do find that entertaining, to be honest. I will, at times, before even a recap video where something controversial like a goal interference call happens, I'll say to my wife, well, I'm going to be dealing with a lot of angry fans of that team in the comment section tonight. And it's just, I understand that's how that goes. Sometimes fans are understanding, like, yeah, that had to be called. But when it's close and it might be borderline, that's when fans get upset. And I get it. I do. One interesting storyline right now is look who's leading the divisions. Boston leads the division. It's fine for them to be in the playoffs. I figured they'd take a step back with all the injuries. I was wrong. I couldn't be happier to be wrong about that. New Jersey. Maybe expected to be in the running for a playoff spot. I think it's a surprise that they're first in the division. Winnipeg being first in their division, that is a surprise as well. Winnipeg, I had expected to have at least maybe a little bit of a bounce back, though all the negativity surrounding Winnipeg over the summer probably got to me on some level. Like just it is the same guys, and maybe I'm bullish on them just for no real reason. But yeah, Winnipeg's been good. And Vegas has been relatively healthy this year, and it makes a big difference. And thus far, they look like the best team in the league. It's still early, but keep in mind that we are coming up on American Thanksgiving in a couple of weeks. And once we reach American Thanksgiving, that discussion happens of, so these teams above the playoff line are likely to make it. And it is a good sample size by the time you reach American Thanksgiving. People will always be sort of ticked off, well, American Thanksgiving doesn't mean anything. But if you check their usernames, they'll usually be a fan of a team that is below the playoff line at that point. And then we get into the teams that are below the playoff line, surprisingly or not surprisingly. The Rangers, it's a surprise. The Rangers have been a really hot and cold team. I think the Rangers and the Kings might be the two that, to me, look like, one night they'll look like, yeah, they're fantastic, they got it all together, and the next night, I don't know. I don't know what happened. So for the Rangers to be below the line is a surprise. The Capitals, the Penguins, two teams that were picked by some to fall out of the playoffs, although there weren't very many that picked both to fall out of the playoffs. And right now it looks like odds are one of them probably does end up missing the playoffs. It could end up being both. I think one of them probably rallies. We'll see which one does. The Lightning being below the playoff line is because of tiebreakers being as they are. They are a team that made the playoffs last year, made it to the final after winning 2 straight Stanley Cups. I do expect them to finish above the line. I also expect the Rangers to end up finishing above the line as well. Then you get out west, you got the Flames below the playoff line right now, which is odd because they won 5 of their first 6 and looked like they were going to be battling with Vegas all year for that top spot in the division. That does not appear to be the case right now, and if they don't get things straightened out over the next couple of weeks, division titles and all that are great, but they may be fighting for their playoff lives. The Predators, below 500 at this point. They have been better over the last couple of weeks, but they're still facing an uphill climb. That being said, they do have the manpower to turn things around and to make it work. All you need is Roman Josi to bounce back from a pretty rough start for him, and that'll help a lot. And then you got the Blues, who might be one of the most shocking falls from grace in that they've started the season 3-0. They were good, and then they lost 8 in a row. And there you go. And I remember that third win over Edmonton, too, the shutout win in Edmonton. That was such an impressive game. And since then, nothing. And yeah, they're below the playoff line. And those are all teams that made the playoffs last year. So that's how much turnover we're seeing in the playoffs. McDavid, not a surprise he leads in points, but a bit of a surprise he leads in goals. And it sort of mirrors Sidney Crosby earlier in his career, the one season where he won the Rocket Richard Trophy for goals. Kind of feels like McDavid's doing the same thing of, well, I think I'll get a bunch of goals this year, win that trophy. I haven't won that one yet. And I wouldn't bet against McDavid. That being said, is he going to stay number one? Odds are Matthews is going to heat up quite a bit. He's been getting better. Ovechkin is always going to be in the conversation when it comes to the goals leader in the NHL. He got off to a bit of a slow start himself, but he's really picked it up lately. And so he might end up winning that trophy. But at the very least, McDavid's probably looking at his first 50-goal season, which is remarkable. One thing to talk about, there are some goaltenders doing quite well. Carter Hart and Connor Hellebuyck, to me, are two real notables. Hellebuyck had an okay year last year, not really a Hellebuyck-like year. So far this year, he's been great. Oh, and look, the Jets are first in the division. Those things are definitely related. And Carter Hart is part of the reason that the Flyers are suddenly relevant. That the Flyers are one of the teams above the playoff line and have these teams below the playoff line. Not that the Flyers are keeping all 4 out. Tortorella's good. He's not that good. But Carter Hart has honestly been really quite good from the start of the year. And, I mean, last year I did not think he was the problem in Philly. And this year, not only is he not the problem, now he's the MVP. So, yeah, Carter Hart is making an argument for the Vezina, and I think if there was the vote right now, Shesterkin would get some votes, yes, but I honestly think Carter Hart would have a pretty good chance at it. They don't vote on that in early November, but keep an eye on Hart's numbers and see if he stays in that range. If the Flyers make the playoffs and Hart's numbers are anywhere near where they are right now, he has a very good chance of winning the Vezina. And there might be an argument for Carter Hart for the Hart, right? Just think about it. If a guy named Hart won the Hart Trophy, it just kind of seems to work. But goaltenders winning the Hart Trophy is very rare. Goal scoring, so there's been a lot of talk about goal scoring being up. And it is, but not as much as is being hyped. I noticed in the games last night, the scoring down a little bit. I noticed a couple of days before that too. I was like, okay, scoring seems to be dialing back. So right now, teams are averaging 3.18 goals per game. Meaning that in one game, you're going to see roughly 6, maybe 6.5 goals, right? Because you double the 3.18, you get 6.36. That's how many goals you get per game. But last year, the number was 3.14. So the amount that the goal scoring is up has been scaled back. It was at ridiculous rates early in the season. It has been scaled back. Save percentage has dropped, but just mildly. League-wide, it's now 906. It was 907 last year. And that's still down from its heyday during the dead puck era. And even in recent years, we've seen averages of 911, maybe 912. And right now it's down to 906. So when goal scoring goes up, you can bet on save percentages going down at least a little bit, and that is the case. But goal scoring is not up much from last year. It's more of so last year wasn't a fluke. Last year is the start of a trend. goal scoring is up and is staying up. The Canucks, the tire fire that they are is in contrast with Seattle being on the rise. The one thing that Seattle has the Canucks have never really had is a clean slate. Whether it's going from Nonis to Gillis to Benning to Alvin, this team's never really had a clean slate. Seattle did. Seattle's in their second season, and it's not easy to put together a team and have them in the playoffs in their second year. And I'm not trying to say that it is, but it's a completely different beast. To build a team from scratch over a 2-year period, as opposed to trying to keep a team competitive and try to figure out what's wrong. And the Canucks have a lot of history, so the tire fire does continue. There's going to be some changes, I would think. It may very well end up being Boudreau. As unfathomable as that seemed to me over the summer, at a meetup, we had a discussion about Boudreau and how much of a rope the Canucks were giving him. And I actually said, oh, they have to give him the full season, don't they? I didn't anticipate this kind of a start. So now on that conversation, if you're watching this video, yeah, I've had to look at this and say, you know what? He might have been right. There could very well be some big changes. In terms of Vancouver, there may not be that job security. Now, for the players themselves, they have the contracts. It's easier to get rid of the coach, especially when he doesn't have a contract beyond this season, right? So you don't have to sell the owner on how much money it's going to cost. But the Canucks on the ice, it's turnovers, it's mental errors, and that's what makes it frustrating more than anything. It's not a lack of talent in the room. It's not a lack of ability to win. It's a lack of will to win. A conversation I've always had when it comes to the Canucks is I was less frustrated in the 80s with the Canucks than I get frustrated with them now when they underperform, because back in the 80s, well, you knew they weren't as good as the Oilers. You knew they weren't as good as the Flames. You knew they were a team of guys who tried hard, and the effort was the point, right? If you have a team that goes out there and they lose all the time, but they leave it all on the ice, and they're doing everything in their power to win, well, it's hard to get mad at the players, right? But in the case of the Canucks, there's a lot of mental errors going on. It's hard to watch. Last night's game with Montreal was the same thing. And as soon as they started to get it together in the third, mental errors show up, bad passes show up, and it goes in their net pretty quickly. Ovechkin, of course, has been in the news past Howe for the most goals scored with a single franchise, past Howe's record with Detroit. Now, on the all-time list, he's now only 13 goals behind Gordie Howe, so he's going to pass Gordie Howe. May very well be before the end of 2022. And he's only 106 behind Gretzky. And I always see the people saying, well, his scoring is going to slow down. It hasn't. He's sitting at, 7 goals right now? His scoring hasn't really dropped off. And I don't expect that it will. And if it does, I expect him to settle into like a 40-goal range rather than 50. And if he scores, let's say, another 43 goals from here, well, that would take him down to, and that would get him to an even 50. That'd take him down to roughly, 65 or 63 to get to tie Gretzky, 64 to pass him. He can do that over, 3 more years after this, I think's left on his contract. He's around for a while. So, yeah, the passing of Gretzky is going to happen probably a few years from now. And, yeah, so he has continued to make a lot of headlines for his goal-scoring ability. Of course, for the Sens, there's the on-ice part of this as well as the off-ice. And I wanted to make sure this was all on-ice stuff, because I was like, well, I could include, and there's a lot of other off-ice stuff that I thought, no, I don't want to talk about that part. Although with part 11 on this board, there is some that's off-ice, but it's still affected, I think, by the on-ice product. So the Senators being up for sale, and of course Ryan Reynolds coming in. This could be a really nice, I don't want to call it a smokescreen, but it could help, because right now they're struggling on the ice and their attendance is low. And this is an argument we've been having with the Ottawa Senators for a long time. I want to say the whole time this channel's been around, the argument about the attendance in Ottawa and why it's not where it should be in a Canadian market. But it is an interesting conversation to have. And before anybody says anything, yes, Arizona plays in a 5,000 seat arena. Great, cool. We'll move on and talk about the Sens. So the struggling on the ice is not great because they're trying to win back their fans, and this was supposed to be the year that things turned around. Now, in the event that they do sell it to Ryan Reynolds, who is going to find a group that can own a team. And I've seen the argument as well about, well, you can't have an ownership group. There's plenty of teams that have ownership groups. You have the primary owner, but there's ownership groups. And so that's what's likely to happen with the Sens if they do sell to Ryan Reynolds. But there are a lot of other ones as well. It's just, it's Deadpool. And he was in attendance and the fans gave him standing ovation. They really want Deadpool. So if you're a billionaire and you want to own the Sens, maybe you reach out to Reynolds and say, you know what, we'll give you a stake in this, and you can be the public face of it, and we'll front the money. It is not outside of the realm of possibility that the team being owned by a group of people, it'll still do well. I want to say Calgary has a setup that's similar to that. That's just as one off the top of my head. But there are examples of that working very well. The Senators need a plan, though, because the season's very quickly getting away from them. And if they have many more losses, no matter how much Pierre Dorian likes DJ Smith, he may have to make that change there because at some point in time, heads start to roll. And so with new ownership coming in, they need the new building, which is part of the reason for the low attendance. The argument about, traffic going into that building they're in right now, Canadian Tire Center, and all of the logistical nightmares that it's been, they do need the LeBreton Flats building, and so that's going to be part of the ongoing. And I know that's not on ice either, but the team needs to improve on the ice as well. You want to make sure when you're going to sell your car that it looks as nice as possible, it's in good shape, because then you can get more for it. And I think if the team is definitely on the upswing and attendance is coming up, if you can sell an owner on that, you're going to make more money. It definitely makes the value of the team go up. And so we'll see how that turns out. But speaking of attendance, and when I got into this with the Sens, I thought, let me take a look at the attendance figures and see where we're at, right? This is the first year where we can really look at attendance in 3 years. Vegas is currently leading the league at 103.1% because you have standing room only. Seattle is also above 100%, but I didn't put Seattle on the board because I thought, well, it's only their second season, and it's easier to sell tickets for a team the first couple of years than later on if there struggles. But for Vegas, and they're not struggling, I get it, but they're year 6, and it's still above 100%. So they're still coming out in droves. They're very popular locally, and I mean locally, like as in Vegas. But not only that, when we were at the concert a couple nights ago, my wife was kind of curious about how many different people she saw wearing Vegas hats. Vegas is a very popular team right now, and their gear sells like crazy, and that tells you people like them. New Jersey is surprising to me at only 69.9% for attendance, but New Jersey's had struggles with attendance before. It's just this is a team now that is playing really well. I expect that number to come up. Buffalo's is tricky. I've been talking about empty seats. And I know when I mentioned it on Halloween, people said, hey, it's Halloween. Okay, but is it Halloween every day in Buffalo? Because it shouldn't be. 64.6% is their attendance, which I think is actually higher than last year, a little bit. But the one thing for Buffalo is they need to get better on the ice. So this losing streak that's brought them back to 7-6, brought them down to earth. And the fact, these losses, they haven't looked great. It's not helping, right? So Buffalo needs that success on the ice in order to have that attendance go up. I get it. I think Buffalo fans said, enough, we're done. But if there's anything I've learned with sports, it's that at some point in time, an owner will start to complain. And I don't know that we've reached that point yet with the Buffalo Sabres. I haven't seen anything, but at some point an owner will come out and complain. And they don't necessarily come out and say, we got to move, but there's always some kind of, attendance isn't up and I'm not happy. And so we'll see how that goes. But there you go. Just 11 topics I wanted to discuss in the young season. Let me know what you guys think in the comment section below. Again, I'm not talking about anything off ice because to me the attendance is tied to the on ice product. So, but you guys can let me know your thoughts. If there's anything I missed, you guys can let me know what you think I missed in terms of the on ice product. Don't forget to hit like and subscribe if you're browsing your way through and you just happened upon this video. In your journey around the internet, the interwebs, you fell down a tube and here you are. But thanks so much for all your support. I will talk to you again soon.